Today we're talking about Bob Dylan. Welcome to the HolmFront. It's fun. One day I'm going to look back at it and just, it's going to be nostalgic. Hello, welcome to the HolmFront. I'm Tyler, your host, and to my right, as always, is Mitch, your overly artistic friend. Mm-hmm. My overly artistic friend. Mm-hmm. I guess they'd be your friend now at this point, right? Like, are we friends with the audience?
With the audience. I thought you meant for me.
I said your overly artistic friend, which is, whatever. Whatever. I botched it. Here we are. Hello. We're going to talk about a movie today. Mm-hmm. It almost...
A good movie this time.
It was almost a Rotten Disparity. Almost. Because it almost hit 20% difference.
Is that the requirement?
Yeah, that was my kind
of
general... I've said it before. Yeah, because it was like 70...
You have. I probably just misremembered.
Yeah, well, I was saying that the score itself is like a 76 or something, and then
gotcha.
It's 91 is the other. Anyway, so yeah, we went and watched... separately this time. You watched it with your mom. I watched it with my grandma.
Yeah.
We watched a movie about Bob Dylan, a biopic, which are a little hit and miss for us. They're interesting films. Like, it depends on how you're trying to portray the character.
Or the person, rather.
Yeah, and, how they choose to go about that is always it's interesting.
Especially when they're an artist, because then you have to factor in
how they view the world, or how the world views them, or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, it's like their art needs to come through the movie somehow. Definitely. Which this one clearly did.
Clearly. Yeah. So yeah, what did we see?
Okay, so we saw A Complete Unknown. It's about Bob Dylan. It stars Timothy Chalamet, and he's in the title role. And it was funny when we were looking up, just kind of getting our thoughts together. Why didn't they cast Miles Teller?
Miles Teller looks just like him.
Like, exactly.
And like, there's even pictures where Bob Dylan, we thought it was Miles Teller at first, and we're like, oh no, that's Bob Dylan, that's Miles Teller. Yeah. Anyway, same
also,
curly hair.
Miles Teller knows how to play music.
He knows drums from Whiplash.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Chalamet was fine. He was great.
He was great, actually.
They're both great picks. It was just a question. Like, I wonder if Miles Teller ever came up in conversation with the casting directors, because he makes a lot of sense.
I can't imagine. We spent 2 minutes looking in, and we're like, that looks like Miles Teller. Like, it was anyway.
Yeah.
Not saying that the casting was bad. Timothy Chalamet actually is an incredibly talented actor.
Yeah. He does a phenomenal job.
I don't think I've ever seen him in something that I didn't like his role. Like,
Agreed.
I've seen The King, obviously Dune, and then what else have I seen him in? I know he plays in Little Women. I haven't seen that one yet, though.
I didn't see that either. I kind of doubt that'll be a very demanding role, though.
No. I think that was one of his earlier ones, though. Like, I think he's super young in that one. Because I think
I don't think he's that young in it.
I think it was like 2016 or 17. He's not that old. He's early 20s. Anyway, whatever. So yeah, he plays Bob Dylan.
No, he's 30 now, isn't he? Or he's coming up on 30.
We'll look that up later.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You just get stuck on the idiot.
Do you not want me to do that?
I don't care, whatever. So Complete Unknown. It features a lot of Bob Dylan's music, and it
all of it, one might say.
It's probably close. But Timothy Chalamet does the music and sings.
I think everyone in this is just singing and doing the music for all the people they're supposed to represent. Like, you got Johnny Cash in there.
Yep.
Bunch of other folk singers that are popular that I don't know. Sorry, I'm not a big in the music scene.
Even Bob Dylan, we're a little unfamiliar with. He's outside of our realm of interest, I'd say.
That's kind of the beauty of biopics, though, is they give you a chance to kind of get to know an artist or an important figure in a field that you're less familiar with. And a nice concentrated dose.
Well, my grandmother and your mom, who both were around during this time, lived through all that. Well, at least my grandmother for sure said that she had a newfound respect for Bob Dylan just from seeing the film.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She was like, she didn't care much for the folk music of the time. She knew who everybody was. Okay. And she was even at a lot of points in the movie was like, man, he looks and sounds just like him. Like, oh, that's just like how he talks. And then she was naming characters as they were showing up, different folk singers and such. So she was familiar with the world, but then, she was like, as much as I'm not a big fan of Bob Dylan, this movie was interesting to see a different side of him or how he came up or who he was and that kind of thing.
My mother did express something similar. She didn't say those exact words, but she did say, like, lean over and say, like, oh, he looks and sounds just like Bob Dylan. And then, you know, her comment about the time being accurately represented was interesting. And I guess she seemed to have a positive take on Bob Dylan. I guess my mother was really big in the music scene when she was growing up, like in a teenager, but Bob Dylan was not someone, I guess, in particular that she listened to very much.
Okay.
But she did say, like, from what little she did, like, sort of remember of him, it was refreshing to kind of see his sort of him being placed in a time that she knew so well, right?
Gotcha.
So it's kind of like it was capturing the whole scene that she was familiar with. And, it's just the choice of artist was a little bit less known, but it was like easy enough to start filling in those gaps yourself, right?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So a bunch of familiarity mixed with the unfamiliar for her.
And I take that to mean that the film is relatively accurate, at least in terms of like depicting the 1960s America.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and it does reference a couple of historical events, even though they're very lightly referenced. It's not the focal point of the film because they do really want to zoom in on Bob Dylan and what surrounds him and his rise to fame.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not surprising that this movie does come recommended from both of us. I would definitely recommend it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's part of it is just like the craftsmanship is really good, which is why a lot of people are talking about how it's probably going to be at the Oscars this year. It probably will be.
I'm sure it'll be nominated, yeah.
Yeah, it probably won't win much because it's going to be fierce competition or however you constitute fierce.
Well, is this 2025 or 2024?
24.
It is 24. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so the acting performances were great. And the fact that like everybody was like literally doing the songs themselves, unless they fooled me, movies can do that. But I don't think so. I think they just.
I went and looked at the iTunes, and it's credited to Timothy Chalamet at least. So he is doing the singing.
Wow, so interesting.
Pretty impressive. Like he does a great job of sounding, not only a lot like Bob Dylan, but also being obviously talented.
Yeah, it made me think after the movie about how difficult it is to be an actor sometimes because you have to really master a lot of different skills, or at least it's helpful if you can. And it made me think if I had like a kid who was like wanted to be an actor, gosh, I would have to put them through like so much.
Everything.
Yeah, I'd be like, well, you gotta learn music, you gotta learn, martial arts, you gotta learn, it's like you just have to learn so many things.
Sure.
Because if you don't know, like you got to put your body through some pretty intense stuff. So I just feel like, and like different skills will be necessary in different roles, and it's just going to limit you if you can't do a lot of different things. So
what's up that one guy did for Winter Soldier? He went because they did a lot of the choreography, I should say, between Chris Evans and Bucky.
Okay,
is the guy that
this
plays
is the Bucky actor?
Yeah. Okay. Sebastian Stan.
Okay.
He was saying that whenever he was out,
he got a real metal arm.
Yep, that was that. He cut his own off and was like, "I'm fully committing." No,
dedication.
He had a little dagger that he would kind of spin around and like play with while he was around his friends, just so he could get familiarity with it. And then obviously he had a couple people he was throwing around and stuff to like figure out the choreography. But that's why it looks so good. Is just because they put time and effort and blood and guts into the. But I mean, like it's that level of dedication, right? Where you're just like, I'm just going to implement this into everyday life because, I mean, how else do you do that? Because you're right. I mean, learning. Not only the mannerisms, the voice, what's the word I'm looking for? Just how someone talks, because he talks a lot like Bob Dylan. He has this kind of weird little sounding voice, and like my grandma, the minute he started talking, was like, "That is exactly what Bob Dylan talks like." And they nail the look and everything, and so, but outside of that, he has to also sing like him and then play the guitar. I don't know if he's played guitar before.
Yeah.
Or if, he had to learn it for the film, whatever the case. I mean, it's super convincing. It looks really good.
Yeah, it did.
But it's reminiscent of very classical, because like actors back, in the day of like Shirley Temple, very often could dance and sing as like a minimum, right?
That was like especially if you're coming from stage, that would often just be expected.
Yep. So like this was very reminiscent of what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
For classical acting, at least, not necessarily for the time period of the 60s, but great biopic. So what did you like about it? What were the positives?
Well, I liked all these things we've said.
Yeah.
I also feel like the direction was quite nice. There's like a scene. I don't think it's really spoiling anything, but it was just really nicely framed because you had Timothée Chalamet like kind of in one corner. If I could do it for you guys or whatever, and then there's like someone in the background, and they get up out of bed because he's like working, and then they walk behind him, and then the camera pans to include them going into the bathroom and like washing their face, and then they come back out, and then they have this conversation, and it was just such a nice, like, I mean, I know it's only like one shot, but there's a number of them I could have chosen.
So it's just a nice use of the set and the framing of the camera without having to do too much, basically.
Yeah, it
Gotcha.
felt like there was some genuine thought put into how they're going to shoot each scene and making sure that it just has really good flow throughout.
Mm.
I don't know that like James Mangold is going to be nominated for an Oscar for it. I think he's just going to be outsourced by too many other directors this year, which I suppose is fair enough. But I mean, his other films, I mean, he's kind of hit and miss. I feel like this is probably his best work, but maybe Logan tops it, just because Logan feels like a really, I don't know, like passionate movie, and it did make a lot of bold choices about how you depict like Marvel characters and X-Men characters in particular. All those characters have been run through the mill, so maybe that movie's a lot more meta than we all realize.
It's just so refreshing because of how different and gritty and just kind of like, and I'm just going to go away from the formula and make something different. Yeah, I mean, I love Logan. I think it's probably the best Marvel film that there is.
Probably. That film feels like very bread and butter, like he's just aggressively like shooting the movie. It's good. It's nicely shot.
Yeah.
But
yes,
this one felt like, okay, if you were to do something and make it nice for me, not just like heat up something in the microwave, what would it look like?
This is the one. This is his 6-course meal.
Yeah, this is the 6-course meal, chef prepared.
Nice.
And he did a great job with it. So
yes, he did.
Yeah, I guess I feel like this one proved himself as a very competent filmmaker, and because it's such different range. Logan is nothing like this kind of movie.
No,
they're very different.
I would not have assumed that was the same guy if I didn't know.
Yeah,
that it was the same guy.
yeah, exactly. But so yeah, I felt like it was just nice to see, and it kind of made me interested to see what he does next. Like very much so, because
does he have a large category? I don't know anything about him.
I don't think he has too many movies, but like the movies he's done are so wildly different from each other.
Gotcha.
So that's what's so weird. I actually think if I'm not mistaken, he did the new Indiana Jones film that was like horribly panned, which is really weird too.
I've not seen that one, so I have no idea what the direction competency looks like.
Yeah, because I feel like that movie's problem was probably the script.
Probably.
Among many other things. The CGI, though, looked really awful in the trailers. I don't know what was happening.
Jumping in Indiana Jones, shall we? I mean, we could probably do that one.
You're right. I have to have a side comment on everything, don't I? All right. Well, getting back
to my rabbit hole friend.
Yeah, just put that.
That'll be another shirt.
And then there's like a rabbit hole, just like
diving in.
Yeah,
just going for a ride. We'll do an Indiana Jones episode though. We'll try and hit all of them. That would be a really fun one actually. But we'll include the last two abominations. So within this one as well, the script was really great.
Yeah, great script.
I will say.
That's the other thing. Just one more note on Logan. That script was nominated for an Oscar for best screenplay.
Okay,
isn't that wild? Of all the categories, you would think to nominate
Did you say
Logan.
Adapted screenplay?
Adapted screenplay, yeah.
Okay, so it's straight out of a comic or something.
Well, no. It's just because it's based on characters who are not your own. They're not original. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it was based on actual comic strips or not, but like it's based off of Wolverine the character, so they can't do that without it being
okay. So that's why it's called Adapted. Gotcha.
Yeah, but it was just crazy to me that was because if I'm not mistaken, that's the first and only Marvel film to get that.
Oh, that'd be interesting to look
recognition.
Up later. Yeah, I wonder if this one will get something for its scripting as well.
Probably. It is a really tight script.
It's a really tight script. I mean, we'll get into a little bit of that later, but the other thing that I noticed was and it was fun to have my grandma there for some of this, just because it was a good window into like how close are they getting this stuff? Because she grew up during that time.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, yeah, they're capturing all of this stuff, and it was like, it was doing it in a way that was reminiscent of Bob Dylan, just very musically vibrant. This film. That being said, there is a lot of music in this movie. They handle so much of Bob Dylan's material. I don't even know if it's all of it. Probably not. He's still touring, apparently.
It's like 4 albums worth.
It's a lot of
I'm
music.
not even kidding when I say that. It's so much music.
It's between, I would say, between like 5 and 7 minutes between each song, and like throughout
It's
the
probably
whole
less.
movie, it's a lot of music. So like you're not
I'd be
going
willing to go
long.
down to like 2.5 minutes. I don't think it goes more than 2.
I'm trying to be generous because I didn't time it, but at the same time, it is a lot of music. Like you're not going to go very long without hearing another song.
If I ever watch this movie again, I will time it. I will just sit there with a stopwatch and find out, because
Find out the
it
average.
is so much.
It's a lot of music. The thing I'll say that's good about it is that all of the music, it all feels very narratively important. So it's either progressing the script, through the song itself, or it's providing a very interesting window into the feelings of the characters in that moment of the script. So none of it feels like pause, we have to sing now. Like it never feels like you're stopping the narrative in order to jump into this music. It does a very good job, and I attribute this to the director, is that he knows when to place them and where, and it didn't feel like it was lengthening the movie too much for me. Mostly because I think I liked the music for the most part. It's not something that like would probably rise to my favorites, top 10 musical artists of all time, but I understand the appeal of Bob Dylan through, the context that this movie gave me with his music on top of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would echo all of that.
Okay.
The music, I enjoyed the music. It only started to feel like it was elongated the movie in the last maybe 30 minutes or so.
Okay.
At that point, I was just, okay, I'm done. I get it. And I guess it was weird too, because I was reading some reviews and some people were talking about like, oh, this film like, overcomes the obstacle of just glorifying Bob Dylan, which I guess is a thing people who are very familiar with his music must do. And I guess that's true of a lot of music artists.
Fair.
We're not, I don't think, well, you're more musically inclined than I am, at least in terms of like,
I have a more diverse taste.
yeah, I'm
If that's
super
what you mean.
narrow.
Yeah.
So, but well, sort of. I just don't catalog it.
Fair.
But I liked all the music. I would happily listen to it again.
Yeah.
Like I would watch. It's not going to make me not watch the movie again.
Yeah.
Stopwatch or no. But it just was something that was wearing on me over time because. And I guess it's an interesting question because I'm looking at this going, you're a biopic about Bob Dylan. Yes, he's a musician. I get that. And I do appreciate that there was no score. Just let his music tell. I feel like more biopics about musicians should be that way. Just use their music. That is your score. I mean, what else would you need? It doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, you're still a movie. And if I wanted a greatest hits of Bob Dylan, I can go get that.
That's fair.
I'm here for a story and to learn more about the person and the character. And I guess it just, at some point, is I'm getting music instead of getting a scene to further develop the themes and ideas and the characters that they're working with. And for me, that became frustrating once I reached the point where I felt that, because I don't really pay attention to lyrics very much. I get like a sparse little bit of it and it kind of helps. And then it's sort of like in one ear out the other. Lyrics just are not a big deal to me. And I know it's like blasphemy. Everybody like hates me for it. But I just don't really like, I just don't connect in that way. And it's funny too, because I'm an auditory learner. So I process things heavily through audio. I think what it is I just need them separate though. I don't like the mixture. It just confuses me. And it's like, then I just relax. And his music is very relaxing. So I'm just sitting there going, this is nice. And I forget to pay attention and be active minded. And that's just my fault. I just don't have a lot of practice with it.
That's fair. Okay.
Yeah. So way too much for me. I mean, what did you, because you said it's too much music, but did you feel like it was all justified being a biopic about Bob Dylan?
I actually would say it's justified for sure, because
even though it bothered you,
I will say I noticed. I won't go so far as say it bothered me necessarily. I will say I noticed at a certain point. I was like, man, this is a lot of songs. Yeah, and I guess I'll have to back that up and say I don't know whether that's a negative thing or not. because it is about Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan is a musician, and that's like the important part of his life. And I think that it's interesting, especially to your point of like making his music the soundtrack to the film, and that clearly is what it is. And then like a whole movie is going to get his music, and that I don't have a problem with that. And I think that it also is a testament on the actors and how much work they put into portraying these musicians, these musical giants, essentially.
Yeah.
So all that being said, I don't feel, and I struggle to come up with an example, but I tend to see these musicals, like I guess Greatest Showman, for instance. That one
Yeah.
feels like it just pauses the movie to play this song, and it might have something to do with the narrative, but
Yeah.
most of the music I didn't appreciate, so that probably didn't help either.
Well, it was modern music, wasn't it?
It was modern music and a period piece, and like I just did not like that. It just stood out to me. This one felt it was relevant to the time, it was relevant to the character, and they kind of harped on what music does, in my opinion. And music, the way that I've heard it said, is like it's the window between the spiritual and the physical, and so it kind of like awakens, something like there's an emotional reality that comes with music, and that's what it felt like Bob Dylan's music, this folk music, was really trying to embody. And they all happen at these very like emotionally important times in the film. Like I really love the moment where he's at home with that one character and he starts playing, and she grabs the song that he had written, throws it in front of him, and says, "Sing this." And then he starts playing it, and then she sits beside him and starts singing with him, because it encapsulated the moment of what they had just gone through together. And so it was a really emotionally tumultuous time, and it was really interesting how that kind of coalesced the moment. And it does that throughout the whole film. I felt like they were placed at they were well placed throughout the movie, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I again, it is a lot of songs, a lot of songs. But yeah, I struggle to determine whether that is a negative thing or not.
Yeah. I think I would rather have it be this way than more towards my preferences, just because
Maybe.
I think, well, because the other question that people brought up was what a mundane way to do a Bob Dylan showcase. And then like, sure, but did you
This is
catch
commentary
how
on this
much?
film?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like, how do you ordinarily get this much music in your movie? I mean, that is certainly a choice. I'm not saying it's, the most revolutionary or boldest film ever made. It's far from it. But yeah, it was definitely noticeable. One thing another scene kind of like that you bring up, though, which I think parallels it somewhat, is there's a scene where I think it's shortly after John F. Kennedy is assassinated, and he writes this piece, and then he's playing it in a I don't know, a speakeasy or something like that. And then this other character is like walking down the street, and then she hears it, and she goes downstairs and she sees him playing it and like reading the lyrics. And those lyrics are definitely caught. And he's kind of like talking about like how much is all this like money and like worth it to you if you're just selling your soul out, basically. I don't remember the name of the song, but it was like really good writing, just on the level of his music. And that felt like I had seen what he was experiencing in the world, and then I saw what his response.
Yeah.
And then I was also watching the audiences, the other people in the world responding to him, because this is before he's famous. So I really liked that sequence because it was just kind of like coalescing together. Like it gave me all the pieces so that I understood like what Bob Dylan meant, like what he felt about this, what other people felt about him, like about how he's like contributing to this movement or this motion.
So you
that's
felt like
happened.
that was an adequate portrayal of the thesis of the film, essentially.
Yeah, on some. Well, actually, I think the thesis of the film is very different. But like in terms of what most people probably think the thesis of the film is, and they're probably right, and I'm just a weirdo. But yes, I'm sorry, I'm backpedaling on it just because I had a very weird take on this movie that we're gonna get to in a minute. But yeah, so that sort of moment I thought was perfect because it did the thing that the Reagan movie that came out this year did not do, where I just did not understand anything that he had done in any way,
As
in
in
any
the film-
emotional way.
The film didn't adequately portray it.
No, it was
Okay.
just like, here's the Berlin Wall. It's horrible. I can't stand. This is like another thing about biopics too. I can't stand that. Like, even if I know what it is, it's your responsibility to depict it.
Right.
Like,
well, that's what your job is, right? Is to artistically portray or to tell a story basically about whatever it is that you're trying to.
Right. You're just a visual Wikipedia page. Like, there's no point to this.
Well, I mean, that's going to involve your opinion. I mean, you're going to have James Mangold's opinion of what that looks like.
That's fine.
But yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was the same. The worst offender of this is the movie The Queen. We're probably never going to talk about this movie, so I better do it now. Here's your rabbit hole for the episode.
We're diving in.
Okay. In The Queen, it is about when Princess Diana dies.
Okay.
Her family, their response to it, and they're going through the grieving process, but it's difficult because the public is like really upset about this, and they want more of a response from the Queen and the royal family in England. So I watched this movie with my roommate in college, who was also a filmmaker, and we sat there through the whole thing and casually looked over at each other, and every time we did, it was this. We were doing that constantly because we didn't know Princess Diana very well. And you're probably flaming on the keyboard right now because every time I tell that to someone, they just get livid mad. And I'm just like, whoa, I don't know why this person was so significant. That movie.
So they tend to be upset because you don't know the story of Diana? Is that?
That's what they're upset about.
Got it.
But here's the thing. That movie acted purely on the assumption that everybody knows Princess Diana.
I don't know that story.
If you don't know anything about her, you will be totally effing lost. And you'll just be wondering, why is everyone over? It's like the whole planet of human beings is upset that this person died. I can't think of another human being other than maybe Jesus Christ, where the entire planet, and not even, he had plenty of detractors himself. So, like, who is like so important that like everyone mourned. It was just nuts to see the fallout of it, and the movie just it's total failing to describe who this person was in any way.
So you're saying it was just assuming that you would be on board with the people upset with her death rather than explaining why people are upset about her death. So
it's bias.
In a historical context, like if I were to come back 50 years later and be
that movie will make zero sense to you,
then it won't help me at all.
No.
Okay.
Just like if you were to make a movie, like just like this one. You know, you and I don't really know Bob Dylan that well.
Yeah.
This movie had to demonstrate who he was, and coming away from the picture, I felt like I know him a little bit better.
Yeah, that's fair.
All I'm asking. But that movie was just like, you don't know, it's your fault.
How dare you?
Sheesh. I get Princess Diana is important now, but like, holy cow. I was a college student. I didn't know her. She hadn't crossed my radar yet.
Idiot.
The thing is that will only get worse with time, though, like you said.
Right. Well, that's my question, is that if you don't have a film, especially a biopic, that's not going to age well, right. Because I didn't grow up at this time, and Bob Dylan is not my cup of tea. I enjoy Johnny Cash, so I knew a little bit more about him. But if I'm coming in far removed, and I don't know anything about Diana, I mean, I'm an American. This doesn't seem like a very relevant event to me culturally, and I think it's a little bit before my time, right? I know. Yeah, so I want to understand, like, this provided a lot of context, and it referenced a lot of events that are more historically relevant or known, I guess, like the Cuban Missile Crisis or John F. Kennedy. They reference those just enough so you know what's going on and how people are responding. Like, that was, is it Kennedy's death, or was it the Cuban Missile Crisis that they were responding to? I think it's the missile crisis.
I think it's just the missile crisis. You're right.
They think they're about to get bombed, essentially.
Yeah.
And so people are running, and she's running down the street, and he hears Bob Dylan's voice coming up the stairs at some joint that he's playing. And he's basically, so the song tells a story, but also how people are responding. Just the fact that they're all down there listening to him rather than trying to get out of the city says something interesting culturally about what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it provided a lot of context for what he provided at that time. So I thought that was another point, was that it was an interesting cultural window into that era of history and what
Exactly.
he brought to it personally. But yeah, like even on a broader context to give a little bit more.
Yeah, I accept that I'm not going to know everything about Bob Dylan after
Right.
one movie. And I actually like that they kept
Also,
it.
since you don't know who Diana was or what kind of relevance she added, you're not invited back to the home front. I just
Exactly.
you should know.
Um, yeah, even in this movie, they don't cover a huge stretch of time with Bob Dylan. It's only like 5 years at most, I think, that they cover.
I don't
Uh,
actually know the timeline because
it's not a lot
it's like
though.
61 or something like that when he shows up, and then I think it's 65 is when it ends. I think, because I remember those two dates popping up.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, those are kind of the times that where all the important stuff happened. I guess where he rose and where he landed.
yeah,
But you mentioned a thesis. Uh,
yeah,
I think now would probably be a good time to jump into that. So what do you? Because you said you told me this personally before, while we were talking about it, because you mentioned you saw it first. Then I called you up and I said, "Hey,
yeah.
is it worth watching?" Because originally I was going to go see Nosferatu with my grandma, and I was like, I am not watching that with my grandmother. Uh,
Why not?
yeah, good lord. So I was like, yeah, is this one worth watching? And you said, yeah, it's just a lot of music, and you said that there was a thesis in there that you thought it was presenting, and then it seemed to become more clear when the film ended. So I was curious as to what that was, because I think I know what it is, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
Okay. Well, what do you think it is? I'm curious.
Well, so the thing that kind of tipped me off, because it's throughout the film, because he's folk music, and folk music is very like, I don't know, it was a thing that they were trying to bring back into the public, and that was what Ed Norton's character and then this other singer, I forget his name, were trying to do, is they were trying to
Okay.
bring to light folk music to the public. And that's one of the conversations that Ed Norton has with Bob Dylan, and says, hey, we're trying to bring this out for very specific reasons, and you're the one that came in and really exploded, and now it seems like you're going in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And he was trying to put Bob Dylan in a bubble, and Bob Dylan's whole thing from start to finish, he never really wavers off this point, is that he doesn't want to be in a bubble. He thinks that the bubbles are dangerous or that they're destructive, because every time someone would try and like explain something, he's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, I'm just providing music, and that's
Mm.
important. And so at the end, when he goes to this folk music festival and he starts playing this music that people don't like or that don't equate to folk music, they just go nuts. They go crazy and they start throwing stuff at him.
Mm-hmm.
And in his mind, he's like, screw it, I'm going to sing it anyway. And then he leaves, and Ed Norton gets him to come back, and he's like, fine, I'll give you guys what you want. And he like storms off, and he basically treats it like nobody won, because he's like, I had a point to prove. You didn't want to hear what I had to say. You just wanted what you wanted, so I gave it to you, but I had to give part of myself up in order to do that. He's like, I I was showing you something else. You didn't want any part of it. So I had to change back into what you want me to be
Mm.
in order to appease you. And I thought it was an interesting, like, I couldn't tell if that was the main thesis of the film, but that seemed to be a very prevailing point of the movie. So I figured that was what you were picking up.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right
Okay.
on the money there with that.
Okay.
Mine is just more broad reaching to include every character who was not Bob Dylan or Johnny Cash.
Right.
Yeah, so that's like a really powerful scene,
It
and it was
was.
interesting. The part that I wasn't grasping for the whole movie is that it was like a virus that had infected everyone,
Yeah.
and
Including the folk music singers.
including the folk
Yeah.
music singers and his love interests and everything, like just everyone. It was kind of mind-boggling to be at the end of the movie and going, why is everyone so upset? Like, because I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, he's a musician. He plays the music for himself, not for you. Like, it's not your place, I guess, to like really tell an artist what they
Right.
should or shouldn't do. Now, I get it. You bought tickets to see him, so
Well,
you
in a
expect
folk
certain stuff,
music festival as well. So like, and
right?
he's moving a little outside that, but he had made a couple of points earlier too, because people were kept trying to like put him in a box. And he's like, it's not about the box, man. I'm just writing music. Like, I just
Yeah.
want a place to play music. And so it was interesting because I noticed that counterpoint. I forgot who said it, I think it was the other folk singer when he was talking to her, when she was trying to be like, "Oh, you write folk music or whatever." He's like, "I don't really know what kind of music it is. This is what I like to play."
Mm.
And so it was almost like him saying, "Yeah, I mean, you can try and label it, I guess, but it doesn't matter." He's like,
Yeah.
it's music. Music is music."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I get the privilege to be able to play it and to share it. He's like, I don't want to be put in a box, because then you start to be. That was what it started with too, because people kept saying, we don't want what you wrote, we want you singing other people's stuff. And that
When it
was
starts,
and that's one of the things that Elle Fanning comes in and says. It's like, well, they're making you play other people's music. You don't get to play your own. And then he has to put his song through someone else in order to finally get out on the scene with his own originality.
Yeah.
But then he wants to continue being original, and then people start to hate it. And that was where
Yeah.
that coalesced.
So, I mean, that's where the film is very timely about people not like wanting an artist for yourself, as
Right.
opposed to respecting that they're still a unique individual. They're allowed to just make their art. And, yeah, we pay them, but that's not I mean, if you pay to see a movie, you don't know if it's going to be a good movie or a bad movie. You just kind of hope, and you could do some research. You could take
Sure.
it on the word of a friend or something. And the same for a book. And I don't see why it's any different for a concert. Like, you don't know what they're going to play. You might be familiar with their music from past examples. They might play a favorite or whatever. But this kind of weird obsession with just everything needing to be like
Within these parameters.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
parameters just being so rigidly defined was just
Well, that's
kind
what
of
art is supposed to do. Is supposed to not be.
that's the whole point
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Which that was crazy too, because I was like, so this is a world of people who don't understand the artistic process whatsoever,
Right.
or what its purpose is at all.
They just
At
understand
all.
the result and what they want it to do for them.
Yeah. Even like that, and even from the musicians as well. Like
Yeah.
Ed Norton's character, he wasn't interested in saying like, "Hey, you got a new spin on it. That's interesting. I don't know if people are gonna like it, but I mean, give it a try. Do you want to like do a mix of both or whatever?
Sure.
Find some middle ground?" No, he was like, "Don't do that, Bob."
At least he came at it more understandingly.
He did.
He was trying to make peace, but also like, yeah, he was also trying to say, yeah, don't
He was completely
expound,
missing the point.
don't expound past these limitations that we've set for you, which is interesting because I think, and this has been a common theme for our show actually too, is evaluating where these lines can and cannot be. And it's interesting that like one of the things that we've used to evaluate is time. And something like Bob Dylan in that concert, those songs are going to age past that moment in time. And eventually people will either like it or dislike it. And I think that there is going to be some kind of bias based on, the context of the time that it exists. Like if someone was there and they were the ones with those expectations and those expectations were not met, they're probably going to harbor that bias, right? Or maybe they'll grow some wisdom and say, you know what? Let me just evaluate that music on a objective level and see if I like it now, regardless of what I was expecting in the time. But yeah, I mean, that is one thing, is like, how does it age? How does it age past the expectations of the people in the moment? And does it hold up? Because when you're looking at something like this, yeah, I mean, his music was good, and he had a message with that music. It wasn't just that he was trying to be countercultural, or that he was just trying to be, what's the word? A contrarian. He wasn't just trying to rile people up. Like, he was trying to say something with it. And, agree with it or not, at least he was saying it. Whereas you get into someone like, and I'll jump back to this example because why not? When you get to someone like Ryan Johnson, who takes someone else's piece and tries to make his statement in that piece, you're now like,
It's like a weird distortion.
You're distorting, but you're also disrespecting someone else's piece in order to make your statement. Bob Dylan, he was making his own music. This was his decision to make. Right? The fact that people were thinking that they could tell him that he was wrong for writing his own song is insulting. It's like, I can write whatever I want. If you don't want to listen to it, then you don't have to.
Right. If he's playing Johnny Cash, then he's beholden to Johnny Cash on some level.
Right.
He can do his own style, his own spin, but it's understanding that you're playing a rendition of Johnny Cash. Maybe it's worthwhile that you understand what it is that you're working with.
Yeah.
But when it's your original music,
yeah,
just birthed from your own thoughts. And like you said, this is a super important point where he's just commenting on the things that he experiences in the world and giving voice to what the sentiment of what a lot of us are feeling, or would have been at the time. That's his job. That's
Right.
what a artist is supposed to do. And you're mad at them for that? It was just this weird.
How dare it not
twisted-
sound like the last 3 songs? Get him off the stage.
Yeah, it was just surreal about how much. Now, I did appreciate during that end scene where they're like throwing vegetables and stuff at him. There's actually a number of people in the audience who seem like they're enjoying the song.
Right.
I liked that a lot.
That was an interesting contrast, yeah.
Because you could see some people being like, well, this is different. I'm down to jive.
Yeah.
And everyone would be like, this isn't blowing in the wind. F you. You know?
I did. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is that Ed Norton's character, trying to be the peacemaker, he's noticing that the like head of the festival is trying to shut the music down. The guys at the soundstage aren't doing it. So he looks at a couple of axes and he's like, I'm about to go do something. I'm gonna wreck this thing. And his wife comes and is like, don't. And it's almost like she's understands.
Like, that's enough.
She's like, yeah, not only is this going to be worse than it should be, like you're just going to make things worse, but also you're going against what you have allowed Bob Dylan to be since the beginning. Like you're going to jump and stand in his way now because it's tumultuous. Like, aren't you supposed to make a statement and stand by that statement? Like, even if you disagree with him, he's allowed to make the statement. And I think that it was an interesting way of purveying all that. Yeah. And kind of showcasing what it is to be an artist. And I'm not saying that like we're, the connoisseurs of art here, but I think it's really important thing to see how that was visualized and how people responded to that. Like there was the violent responses, but then there was the people that were like, you know what, maybe there's something to this. Like, let's let him say it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, Bob Dylan obviously went back and gave them what they wanted, but he got to say his piece at the same time. So, I mean, you win some, you lose some.
There's a really great movie line that goes, "It won't hurt you to listen."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great line.
Yeah. I did want to talk a little bit about his personal relationships as well, because when it permeated to those characters, that's when it got really weird. Because this other stuff is really fascinating. And I think you've just addressed it so poignantly about the deconstruction of that whole scene. The other characters I wanted to mention, that's when the reactions were just almost like surreal. So he has, I'm going to spoil a little bit here, but he has this girlfriend, and when they start going out, Bob Dylan's not famous, so she pays for the dates and everything. And she doesn't seem to mind it too much, but she does get a little perturbed that he's kind of a slob. She has this like trip that she takes in Italy or something, and she comes back and wants to see, and he's, having to rustle around and clean up the place because he's a bit of a slob. And she seems to want him to succeed, because she has that line where she tells him, oh, like, it should be your music, you playing your music, not someone else doing a cover of your song. That doesn't make sense. That was very nice of her. And then the movie takes a weird turn. So the two of them break up at some point, and then later on, he tries to reconnect with her. He goes over to her apartment, and he's like, hey, hop on my bike. We're going out, and I'm going to do a concert. And she just kind of goes along with it. So she hops on, tries to embrace the moment. And so he goes up, and he's singing, and he's doing a duet with this other woman. And she's watching it, and everyone's loving the song. Everyone's loving the music. And then she's just like tearing up. And she's just like, I can't take this. This hurts so much. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, she knows that the two of them cheated on her. Makes sense. I mean, because they're really like, they're doing a duet, and they're like, they're pretty close, and it just seems like the connection is real strong. So that's what I took, especially because I knew that they had an affair. But then she leaves, and then Bob Dylan chases after her, and they have this really nicely shot, tender scene. And then she explains the reason, and it wasn't that. She was upset that he was famous and she wasn't.
Oh, I didn't get that.
That's exactly what she said, though. How could you not get that?
I just don't remember all that was said in that scene. That's all.
Oh, gotcha.
Huh.
Well, so yeah, she says she's like super upset, and she's like, "You're just so famous," and they make some circus comparison because he used to be the circus, I guess.
Right.
And she's like, it must be fun to be the guy in the circus, but it's not fun if you're just the person, the plate that's being juggled or whatever.
Well, no. So, okay. So what I took from that conversation was that she was not the most important to him. He's the juggler, and he has multiple plates that he's spinning and juggling, and she's just one of them. Instead of being the thing for which he's living, or that, that he's devoting his life to, she's just another plate up there that can be replaced at any time. That's what I got from that conversation, is that she's just one of the many things that he's juggling. And I understand how that can be contextualized, but yes.
You're right. That's a very accurate read, I think.
So, I mean, maybe yours is right, but the thing that happened there was that she was suspecting her for a long time. Because remember, when she comes home, he doesn't drink coffee. And so she comes up and sees the coffee out, and she's like, Did you learn how to make coffee for yourself? And he goes, yeah. And then she hears the rendition of his song sung by this character. And so she starts to suspect something, and then they're touring together, and so she kind of puts it all together and is like, yeah, okay, so he's cheating on me.
She doesn't, though, because she never says that.
She suspects it.
But she doesn't tell him. That's the reason.
So most of the problem with that argument is that all of this breakup and such, and what leads up to the breakup, it's all off screen. Because they do this big time jump, and then they're broken up. Because he actually goes back once before. Remember when he gets hit in the bar?
Yeah.
He goes back, and she's with somebody else, and she just mentions, like, yeah, we broke up. But she still brings him in, and, like, is wiping his face down with the dude that she's with, like, sleeping in bed 2 feet away. And he's like, who is it? And then, Bob just leaves. But then he comes over later, and I guess she's single again. And he's like, come with me. We're going to wherever, this festival. But she clearly knows that something has happened between this other character and him. And so when they're singing together, even though this character is clearly somewhat vitriolic towards Bob Dylan, the fact that they're singing together and it's like got this weird tension going on, it starts to build in her.
It doesn't matter if they've slept together or not, so much as just the fact that she's always going to be around because it's part of the...
Right.
Or if not her, then someone else.
Right. It's going to be a reality that, it'll always be a wonder. Like,
yeah, I guess that's true. I was just like, wait, hold up. You're upset because he's famous and you're not. I was like, but you weren't happy when he wasn't famous. So now you're upset that he is famous? Like, did you just not equate the two? Like, you can't have it both ways. Like, he's a musician. Musicians are either not famous or famous. You don't really get a lot of middle ground.
I think that what I was getting from all of that was that musicians tend to be very passionate, right? But they don't tend to be very stable. Like, artists in general just kind of they got a lot of passion.
But she knew that from day one.
But the thing about it is that it's very attractive right off the bat. And you jump in a little further than you mean to before you realize, like, okay, so this isn't going to be giving me a lot of that long-term stability that I want. It's going to give me that short-term passion that I fell in love with at the beginning, which will last long enough for you to kind of get in there and then you're too far gone to leave. And so it's a common problem with that type of behavior. And I think she was trying to wrestle with that reality, is that I could just run off and live in fantasy land for a while, but eventually this is going to bite me again. Like, it seems to be this kind of rotating cycle that she noticed when she was like, because jumping on the bike and throwing care to the wind, very fun, very romantic. But then getting there and realizing what that would mean long term, especially like, and I think that was really well told with him singing with that other woman, was like, okay, so you got to take the good with the bad. If you don't like, and I think she made a good decision. Like, she was like, okay, I've got to evaluate this realistically. Like, is this going to be something I can deal with for this amount of time? Because it's going to always be like this. And she made a choice. No, it's not something I can do.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I'm still kind of sticking with my take. I thought she was just being so self-absorbed. Because the thing is, like, again...
I mean, he did cheat on her.
Well, yes, but you have to use that as your reason.
That's fair. That is fair.
That way I know that you know.
Well, I think, because the time jump, I think that she had been like, okay, well, enough time has passed that maybe this is different. And then she realized in that moment that it wasn't. Yeah. That's how I took it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit of clarity on that.
That's
maybe
fair.
one less song so you could add a little bit of context would be nice.
A little more dialogue, a little less singing.
Just a little bit, and then I wouldn't have this problem.
Fair.
But like the other part to me was that because she was a painter too. So I'm like, what are you just worried about him stealing your thunder? Is that the problem? Like,
Well,
how much are you concerned about fame? And also, too, you would get to be the wife of Bob effing Dylan. Does that not count for anything? Did you know I was reading, and apparently Eleanor Roosevelt was the first woman who was asked to run for president.
Okay.
And she said no. Had she run, she might have won. She was that popular. She was that well. I mean, people almost knew her more than they knew FDR.
Okay.
Like, so I'm just saying, like, imagine if Eleanor Roosevelt had been like, no, F you, FDR. Like, he's running for president. Are you going to marry him or not? Like, that comes with him running for president because he's living a life. Okay. And so, like, I just feel like Bob Dylan was living a life. Like, because that's the thing, like, because the other woman, too, that he's doing duets with or whatever, she gets mad, too. She gets mad. Like, he gets up in the middle of the night and he's playing his music and real quietly and just kind of like writing notes or whatever, and then wakes her up. And she gets all mad at him, and she's just like, you woke me up. And I was like, okay, you're not genuinely mad about that because that's a very shallow thing to be mad about. But she was genuinely mad about that. She gets super pissed. And my mom afterwards, she was all, no, it's because she wanted him to be back like in bed with her and to be like be close to her or whatever. And I was like, and no, she knows, like, this man has been doing this literally from the moment the movie began.
He's always up
early,
doing
writing
stuff.
his music and playing it real quietly to himself. This is just his routine.
Well, arguably, that's what she fell in love with.
Right.
That was what connected them in the beginning. Was like, so it was
super hot. So just let him do it.
I will say that there obviously was more contextually around that because she felt like he was just showing up to use her again and then just jump back into his own little world rather than share any of it with her. And maybe that's right.
He did it, but he was making the music in your space.
That's fair. Maybe
he trusts you enough to write his music with you in the room. And like in the future, in a more practical sense, to be like, okay, yeah, it's cute, but also we're going to need to get a soundproof room, or you're going to have to go to the balcony.
Shut up, Bob.
I'm going to have to get some sleep from time to time. But it's just like, no one in the movie understood what it means to be an artist in any way that like people have like a routine.
Or at least
like,
they weren't forgiving of the fact that it was different than their routine or that it didn't involve them or include them or whatever.
Zero forgiveness, zero understanding whatsoever. But they were coming from other artists, painters, and musicians. I'm like, how do you not know that he has his own way of doing things? And I'm not saying he was a perfect guy. I'm just saying, like, you are acting like he's doing something that's totally atypical behavior. And
well, it is
it's
atypical
not.
behavior, but the thing about it is they're acting like it was specifically against them when it was like most of them
had nothing
like,
to do with them.
Yeah, it was like the guy just gets up and writes in the middle of the night. I mean, that's just his method.
He's not like he's some drunk.
Right, he's not.
Like, what is your standard? He's writing music? He's doing his creative
I love how much this bothers you.
I think it's just
personal.
terrifying. Yeah, because as an artist myself, that would be terrifying if someone's like making all these accusations and I'm like, I'm just trying to write. I've been doing this since day one. Don't you know?
Sure. This is part of who I am or how I do this. Yeah, that's fair.
And like as an artist yourself, wouldn't you be able to make that jump from time to time? Like, and I get what you're saying too. Yeah, like given the context, she thinks he's just seeing her for a one-time fling. And maybe he is. But like, put in the work, babe. Like, if you want that guy to stick around, you got to make it clear that he has to stick around for you.
Sure.
And like, it just seemed like it was his fault only, and you had no part to play in this whatsoever.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like,
I'd agree with that. I think that there was, no one was clear about what they wanted. They just expected something, and then they're mad when he's not giving it away, when they're not telling him what they need.
Right.
And it seemed like that was a common theme, was that everybody had expectations of him, and that's what pissed him off finally in the end, was just like,
right.
Screw your expectations. This is what I'm giving you. If you don't like it, This is what you get. You can go get something else from somewhere else.
Right. It's then became this thing that represented with culture and society we're all doing. And he was
Right.
like, forget it. Like, I'm just, these backwoodsy, folksy people, they don't like my music, so I'll just take it elsewhere. These women who just don't understand that someone is working at their job and their passion. Okay, just part ways with them too, I guess. I mean, this sucks. Like, you're surrounded by people. That's what I meant. You're surrounded by these like narcissistic, self-interested people. There's no room for him whatsoever for like who he is as a person. It felt like.
Sure.
And I'd be fine with like knowing the other characters more too. But the movie just didn't really expand. It wasn't a duet of a film. It was just about Bob Dylan. So that's all I got to go off of.
That's fair.
So I don't know what these other
Maybe
women
there's
wanted
more
so much.
context, yeah.
Yeah, like did his girlfriend want to be famous too? Because that might play to a factor.
Sure.
And I might wonder about it because she's a painter. But also, like, maybe not. Like, maybe she's more private than that. It's too hard to say.
Yeah.
This is weird people. So I came away just like what? Just kind of disillusioned, I guess. It just felt like going back to an era where no one understood art, like artistic practice, even though they were artists themselves. That was really just surreal.
That's a fair point.
Little collaboration, people.
Or just understanding.
I mean, this makes me think the script is probably more insightful than I initially thought, though.
Maybe. I mean, it's provided some good discussion, good thought. I will say the one person that seemed more than understanding, despite his personal failings, was the character that played Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
Seemed like
because he was an artist.
Well, because it was an interesting thing that Bob Dylan, he has a conversation with him about, these guys, they're just wanting me to be something or to sing something specific rather than coming to hear my music. They want me to sing like something else that I had written or something someone else had written. And Johnny Cash was like, I want to hear it. And it seemed like he was genuinely like, go up there and sing what you got to sing, man. Like, even if they don't like it, whatever, just put it out there. That's what you're saying, so go ahead and say it. But then he was also the one, when all the tumultuous behavior is going on and people throwing stuff, he was the one that offered his guitar and was like, go out and give the people what they want.
Yeah.
You might as well go make some peace and then go on. And he was very kind of neutral about it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't forcing him. He was like, hey, this is probably the right thing to do, so I'll give you an avenue to do it, and then we'll move on from there. And it just was like, I liked the way he handled those situations. He didn't seem like a good guy overall. I love the scene where he gets in his car and he's drunk as hell.
Yeah.
And he like, smashes into the car in front of him and backs up and hits the car behind him. But he's just trying to get out of the way so Bob can leave with his bike.
Right.
He's like, oh, I'm on your way. I'll fix that.
Sorry about that.
He sets his bottle down and then it slides off and crashes on the floor.
Without the car moving. He just sits it there, walks away, and then slides off, crashes. He doesn't even acknowledge it. Yeah, that was really funny, too.
That was good. But yeah, he was the one that was like, say what you got to say what they want to hear, and then everybody's happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting way of just being like, it doesn't really matter, man. As long as you're saying what you want to say and people are hearing what they want to hear, and everybody can go home.
Yeah, he kind of illuminated like, well, you had your moment to say something,
right.
So everybody else
and on a good note.
Yeah, and everybody had also come to hear something in particular, and part of what we do as musicians is entertain.
Sure.
So it makes sense. So like he seemed to have that good balance of like entertainment and art, where part of it has to be for you, but a part of it has to be for other people too.
Sure.
And yeah, I definitely appreciated that as well. And yeah, I mean, it is just an interesting topic of like, what is a fair thing to ask or expect of an artist?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's such a different line of work than what most people do. Like,
it's not as straightforward, for sure.
Yeah, if you're a car manufacturer, either the car is made right or it's not. It's pretty much just like a zero-sum game in in most careers. But with art, it's different. There's a lot of nuance.
It's not
and
as mathematically direct, for sure.
Yeah, and it requires like the artist to pour themselves into it in order to make it any good. But that sort of just necessitates, I think, some privacy and ownership for them, because that is a personal sacrifice. That is a vulnerability that they have to put out into there. And
well, I think that was, so Ed Norton probably embodied this the best, is that he a lot of the times was a lot more willing to allow Bob to kind of do his thing. But at a certain point, he started to branch into the vein of using Bob Dylan for his own gain. He was like, I want you to do this for this result. So he was trying to push him into this corner of, furthering his own means, his own desires. And Bob Dylan was like, no, that was never the point. I'm not trying to tell your story. I'm not trying to do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm me. I'm different. I'm not, this isn't my message, or our messages aren't exactly the same. Therefore, like, you can't just use me as your voice, even though that's what he was trying to do at a certain point. And I think that was an interesting topic of, anyway, interesting
Yeah.
thesis of the film for sure.
Yeah, because Ed Norton is more passionate about folk music being like uplifted and more popular, well respected or whatever. But Bob Dylan had no interest in that, like you pointed out
Right.
before. And it
He
was
seemed to resonate more with folk music, but it wasn't about bringing folk music to the masses for him. It was about, like, this is just what I like to write.
Yeah.
And if I change at some point, I don't want to be relegated to this forever. I don't know. It's an interesting commentary on that.
I mean, yeah, especially because he's so committed to it. Like, he's just doing it all the time as they depict it. And he's written a ton of music.
Yeah.
At the end of the film, it said that he won a Pulitzer or
something like that, yeah.
something for writing, though. And he's the only musician to have done so. I thought that's pretty wild. Yeah. Like, most musicians do not get, like, I think some people would say enough credit. I'm just going to say credit
sure.
for their writing. I mean, because a lot of it is very much like, well, I don't even, what? I should talk with more poets how they feel about music, because I bet they would have an interesting perspective.
It's a little outside of our range for sure. We're not writing music, but get the sentiment, and I get the place from where it comes.
Yeah. Did you feel like this movie... I don't even know how to phrase the question, but I just want to end on that like thought. And I'd like to hear your take on the idea of, the art being made, like who it's for, who has like ownership of it. Because like this being a movie itself, it's like James Mangold and Timothy Chalamet have some ownership in particular. I mean, everybody involved, but them in particular, of the film project. And it's sort of like there's this extra reflection. I mean, kind of like the Joker film, where Todd Phillips said like he made that because he would done comedy pictures like the Hangovers or whatever, and he felt like he was getting really frustrated at that he couldn't just tell the jokes that he wanted, because it felt like everybody was just offended all the time. And he's like, everyone's just so offended, nobody can laugh at anything. So he made that Joker film specifically to talk about that issue, which I thought was really novel, and I think that actually reinforced quite a bit of what went in there. It's just like everybody wanting this character to be a certain way, and he's just like, man, they're like this to me. They're the embodiment of these energies and these movements. So I felt like this movie was actually similar to that, and I just kind of wondered if you maybe saw that parallel or had a thought about. I know I gave you an impossible question. This is one of my questions I do in my classroom all the time, and I just get blank stares. But I can give it to you because you're my friend.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, I don't think it was trying to make that grand of a statement. And part of me wonders, at some point, like, what would I feel like if I were Bob Dylan at this point seeing this movie? Is like, I know I'd be like, that's not how that happened, or that's not, And obviously, it's got to take into account biases and interpretations that might not be completely 100% correct. But also, how correct can you be if you're dealing with like a relationship, and the problems therein are always going to have two sides, right? And it's the same kind of thing with a biopic, is that it's always going to have factors that you're not going to have perfect. It's going to tell the grander story. And I think this does a good job, from what I understand of this topic, of like handling the music of him, and then him as a character, without necessarily like, it doesn't seem to glorify him necessarily, but it also doesn't seem to put other people down around him. It was more just trying to catch the sentiment of why he existed, what he was doing, and then what other people around him expected from him. And so I try and put it in that context. If that's kind of answering your question, I think it did a really good job of that. But also providing an avenue for some of these larger conversations about artistic endeavor and music in general and the cultural aspects of the time that it's depicting. So if that's answering your question properly,
It is.
I think that's what I got from the movie, and I was okay with it. And I like the thought of making sure that, we keep our biases in check too. Just because this is what you're seeing on screen does not mean that that is how it happened. Like, your problems
Yeah,
with the Elle
yeah,
Fanning character, like, we don't know how that conversation went or what led up to it. I mean, maybe he's a horrible piece of crap. Like, we don't know.
yeah.
We just know this is the interpretation being shown on screen. Like, we have no idea what this other character. What we do know is that apparently she was an activist and, artist in her own way, and they have their differences, whatever that might be. And maybe there was this kind of apathetic difference that they have that led to the problems in the relationship. And who
Mm-hmm.
knows? I mean, it may very well have been her expectations that weren't being voiced properly to someone who didn't understand how to properly give that to her. He had
Yeah.
some things that she wanted, or he was very romantic, or whatever it is that drew him to, or drew her to him in the first place. Who knows? I think that outside
Mm.
of all that, if you're looking at it from a broader perspective, that this captured a lot of those elements well enough to make you consider them
Yeah.
in, the ways that we've talked about on this episode.
Yeah. I think actually that's interesting. I have a thought about maybe Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan were sort of like Bob Dylan. They were the sort of enlightened artists, right? Almost like we'll talk about like like someone's like a man child or something. And it represents someone who
Some
is
level of maturity.
yeah, they're an adult, but they're not really acting like one yet.
Yeah.
And there's this awkward in between phase, and maybe that's where the other characters were, at least in terms of what the movie was interested in. And the movie's point was that Bob Dylan was a character who had kind of figured out who he was as an artist very quickly. And that's
Right.
interesting to see him just have like a laser focus on it so fast. And then as you go through the film, there's all this pushback and tension from other people. But really, it's like the people just haven't dealt with these problems themselves, you
But
know?
also showcase that, as laser focused as he is in the beginning, he has a natural development, a natural growth, if you would, musically as he continues. And people don't like that he's growing in that direction, but to him, it's like, this is just how it goes. Like, I don't want to come in and provide the same
Yeah.
thing over and over and over. I actually want to grow in this space. And this is how I'm growing. This is how he's maturing within the musical world or the artistic world, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't like it. But it was, it's them not willing to accept for whatever reason, whatever personal biases they have, or, whatever bubble they want him to be in. It's
Yeah.
getting popped and they don't like, and people don't tend to like their bubbles being popped. But I think art is supposed to do that. It's supposed to
Right.
make you think and consider, what is outside those bubbles. Am I being closed-minded, etc.?
I think people who said about this movie that it wasn't like daring enough, I think they're just flat out wrong based on this conversation because it's like totally different reads.
Right.
That's why I was reluctant to say anything else, but I was also thinking to myself, I'm
You mean
like,
to me before I saw it?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
about the thesis of what I thought it was, because you were like, oh, you felt like it kind of dropped it or something, and I didn't. I was trying to navigate you out of like, I'm not blaming the film because I was like, I
Yeah.
don't actually think the film did anything wrong. I was like, I know it's me, but I also just don't know. It was just an interesting route to get there. So I think I just got in the mood of being the Bob Dylan wavelength. So it
Maybe.
just seemed like sensible things. That's probably what he felt like when everybody was reacting.
You're probably. I mean, who knows? Maybe. Yeah, I think it's an interesting.
He's like, this is very accurate.
Maybe. He probably watched it and was like, "Man, felt like I just watched my life." Maybe. Who knows? It definitely is an interesting discussion. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
didn't give me a bias before I went in. I was interested to. I mean, obviously, I was going to know, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to be able to evaluate it just based on what it gives me and how I perceive it. And that's another interesting thing about art in general is like everyone's going to take it differently, whether it be in small
Yeah.
details or as a whole. I mean, people can watch certain movies and get completely different interpretations than other people. But I think that that's interesting. Like
It
that's
is.
what it's supposed to do. And that's why it's so hard to judge it on an objective versus subjective merit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think we've done a good job so far of trying to be objective in how we view it, but also to like pick apart where it may have done something objectively bad, even though it's a subjective property. But also like art is very often trying to give a message, right? Like what we call it the thesis, because we've gone into film so much. But you know, it has a central through line and it's trying to get across. And you know, whatever you take from that, it might be someone different. Like I just know you really well, so I knew what you were probably pulling out of the movie and what you thought the thesis was. And I mean,
Sure.
I did come to the same conclusion, and so I was like, okay, I think I got it.
There's a
Um,
point at which we united,
yeah,
but then there was plenty of
disagreement or
interesting diversion
yeah.
throughout the whole film. Exactly.
But yeah, that's the point. Is that it's supposed to convey different things to different people, like because it's part of your bias, your experience. It's part of like you know, if you've created something or not, you're going to take something different. Like you took this very much as an artist and like you probably put yourself in his position where you're like, well, yeah,
I think I
if
did.
I'm Dylan and these are my methods and all of a sudden someone has a problem with my methods when they've never been different, like, yeah, I'm going to hate that because it's like, well, this is who I am. Like, if you didn't know that, like, you're just not paying attention. So you didn't really care at all in the first place.
Right. So now it's my fault.
Right.
Everything about wrong in this relationship is my fault when
Right.
you're the one who should have been listening to me also.
Right.
Like,
you should have been paying attention to this is who I or how I do things or who
right.
and if you had a problem, like you should have said that in the beginning. Like, why all of a sudden are you having a problem with this?
Right. But maybe they did. And the film omits that because Dylan missed it. And so then we miss it.
Maybe. But again, and those are interesting reflections on ourselves now, which is another interesting thing about art is that you can now evaluate. And that I was actually thinking about this too in a more general context, I guess, was that film gives a really interesting perspective, and books do this too. Actually, I think it was a book that I was reading, but they give a really interesting perspective of giving you kind of a timeline and like what someone's life can look like from start to finish without being in the moment, right? You can look at it as this like bigger picture and how certain things can affect you or regrets can, you know, you can deal with regret or how to avoid regret, that kind of thing. Art's a very interesting way of purveying that, you know, that takes you out of your moment to moment life and kind of giving you a way of looking into a window that might help you put things in a bigger, broader perspective. And I think this movie did that pretty well also is that it did a little bit of time jumping and a little bit of like, it removed, you know, a lot of smaller details like their breakup and such, but it also realized that those weren't important. It realized what the important things to give you were and left the rest up to kind of to interpretation because you can put yourself in that scenario. You can insert yourself into that narrative and kind of understand like maybe this is how like I was wrong or someone else is wrong or how I would deal with the situation, etc. Like it provided a way in that you wouldn't necessarily get a chance to see if you're caught in your own moments, you know? Anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that's really poignant for the film. And I'm glad we took few extra minutes to just kind of navigate through that because I feel like this film is going to be the Oscar villain of the year, which sucks because it shouldn't be the villain. Because it comes across, it can as like just a biopic about Bob Dylan.
Sure.
But I think there's so much richness to it, especially in the screenplay, because all the omittance of things really does alter the course of it. And like you said, you could now project into it, which gives an avenue for the audience to like be in the picture.
I think it gives it an element of value, yeah.
Yeah. Which I think that definitely ups its stock. So
definitely a film that makes you think about it quite a bit afterwards.
Yeah.
Clearly. I mean, we've just done an hour and 13 minutes on
Yeah. If you've not seen it, you should go see it, though.
Yeah, highly recommend. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Go for it. Complete Unknown. Go win the Oscars.
Thank you for watching. This has been our review of Complete Unknown.